This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Welcome, everyone. Today we have a very special subject because tomorrow is a very unique day on the calendar. Tomorrow, the 17th day of Iyer, is the Yahrzeit of one of the all-time great Poskim Gedolei Achronim, Rabbeinu Yechezkel Landau, known as the Noida B'Yehuda. And Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was niftar on Yud Zayin Iyer, so I want to learn some of the biographical and historical background of the life of the Noida B'Yehuda. Last week we discussed at length his relationship with some of the other Gedolim of the time. Namely, he felt compelled to intervene and to make peace between Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz and Rabbi Yaakov Emden. He wrote the famous letter of reconciliation, the Igera Shloimim. On Friday we learned about how he became the Rav of Prague and his relationship with Reb Zarach Eidlitz. And let's learn a little bit about his general background and how the times that he lived in and the people that he was surrounded with, how that shaped those times and the subsequent history of the Jewish people. Okay, so we're going to begin with the introduction of Shal Teshuvos Noida B'Yehuda from his son Rav Yakovka, who wrote something called Divrei Yedidos as an introduction to the Shal Teshuvos Noida B'Yehuda, and he writes, I'm going to speak a little bit and recall for us and for our descendants for eternity. This tzaddik was born on the 18th day of Cheshvan in the city of Apta, and he was an only child to his father, his father was a wealthy man and a Jewish leader. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Halevi Landau, and he came from a very prestigious lineage. We'll see what it is. He writes very poetically, Gan Hadassim Mafur Ben Yimoisim Mikal Yoifi Loi Mekalsim. He was wealthy, he was a prestigious person, but a God-fearing person and a modest leader of the Jewish people. His wife's name and the mother of Yehuda, her name was Chaya. So interesting, the father was Yehuda and the mother was Chaya. So that's why his sefer on Shal Teshuvos is called Shal Teshuvos Noida B'Yehuda, in honor of his father, and his sefer on Shas is in honor of his mother, Chaya. So a very beautiful token of appreciation to his parents. And his mother's father was Rebbe Lazar, who was an Av Bezin in Dubna. Okay.
When did he live? Do we know?
Yeah. So we're talking, he was nifter in the year Tavkuf Nun Daled, which is 1794, and he was born in Taf Ayin Daled, which is 1714. So he lived 80 years, from 1714 to 1794. 80 years for those times. That's a decent career.
I was in my class with his great grandson.
Yeah. There's someone in my shul who's a 9th generation from Yechezkel Landau, and somehow my wife's family is related. In fact, my second boy is named after Mayor Landau. Okay, but be it as it may, the Noida B'Yehuda was a descendant of the great Rav of Krakow, Reb Heschel. Reb Heschel. Now, it's interesting, after the Megala Amukos when the Megala Amukos was about to pass on, they asked him who should be the next Rav of Krakow, and the Megala Amukos invoked the pasuk Hineni Omed Sham Lefanecha, and that's Rosh Teva's Heschel. That's how they appointed Reb Heschel. Anyway, Reb Heschel was one of the early Rabbanim in Krakow, so now he was a descendant of Reb Heschel, and that until he was the Heschel of Krakow, till today we call him Rabbeinu Reb Heschel. One of the few people, the Rebbe Reb Heschel. There are a few people that are given the title, the Rebbe Reb, the Rebbe Reb Yonasan, the Rebbe Reb Shmelka, okay, and so on and so forth. Now, interesting, the Noida B'Yehuda seems that he was also a descendant of the Maral. Because if you look in Shal Teshuvos Noida B'Yehuda, Even Ezer, Simon Pei Zayin, in number 2, he says, I remember, Nahirna Kad Havina Talia, I remember when I was a child, 9 or 10 years old, I saw the Pinkasais, like the archives of the region of Krakow, and I saw some of the Go'inei Olam who signed on it. My great-grandfather, Rabbi Shel Komnei Agola, Rav Heschel, and my uncle, the Maharal. So here he had very prestigious lineage. It's interesting. If you look at number 3, he was also a descendant of Rashi. If you look, yes, which is interesting because Rabbi Yehuda was a Levi and Rashi was not a Levi. But Mitzad Ima, he even says, "V'yan shani migaza Rashi." Since I'm from a descendant of Rashi, Yagati liyashiv divrei Rashi al-Nacha. I put in a lot of effort to establish Rashi in the proper pshat. In other words, he was compelled. He felt motivated to explain Rashi because he was a descendant of Rashi. Now, the truth is, a lot of people are descendants of Rashi. Supposedly, I'm a descendant of Rashi, and I used to think that was a big deal, till I recently discovered that 80% of Ashkenazic Jewry are descendants of Rashi. Wow. And which is an amazing thing. I mean, chances are you come from Rashi. Why? Because in the times of Rashi, do you know how many Ashkenazic Jews there were? What would you guess?
10,000.
10,000.
Really?
Yeah. In all the world.
Wow.
There were only 10,000 Ashkenazic Jews in the world.
Most of the where was the world created? Middle East, Mesopotamia, Greece, Spain, whatever.
There are only 10.
People lived in Europe.
There are only 10,000 Ashkenazic Jews, and most of them were wiped out in the Crusades, or many of them were. So Rashi happened to survive. So I was thinking, sometimes people, there's a thing, people want to have a boy. They want to have a boy. It's a good thing that Rashi had only daughters, because all of Klal Yisrael came from Rashi, and so there you go. The Noid Yehuda writes in the Hakdama of the Noid Yehuda that, by the way, we said he was born in
1714.
He was born in 714, and he was born in the city of Apta, and he learned by Rav Moshe Yaakov, the Abbezin of Apta.
What country was Apta? Do you know?
I'm assuming it was in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Okay, take a look.
Krakow would be
in
Krakow today of Poland?
Yes. If you look, the Noid Yehuda, he married at age 18 years old. We're going to see the daughter of the Gvir, Rabbi Yaakovka, and he writes in his Hakdama about his practice of Hasmada. He says, "V'chasher me'avi nefradati, I separated from my father, and u'mibeisai lebrod yatzasi, I went to the city of Brod, because his mechutin lived in Brod, and he joined there together with God-fearing friends, and he separated from them. He separated from the community for the 6 weekdays, meaning he spent the 6 days of the week locked up in the Beis Medrash. He did not come home except for Shabbos. All 6 days of the week he spent in the Beis Medrash. Rak kol askenu b'chol ma'amasei kochenu. All of our business and all of our strength was in learning, but specifically what learning? B'yama Talmud of a Paiskim. And we're going to see if there's one thing that the Noid Yehuda, among all of his achievements and among all of his accomplishments, the one perhaps that is most prominent is his elevating the importance and the status of Shas and Poskim, of that is the most primary dimension of learning. He says all of our koyach was learning Talmud and Poskim, and v'ha'isha asher yimadi, the woman that was with me, la'ezer v'loy kenegdi, who was helping me, not against me. That's a play on words. Zehu zechusa, this is her merit. Sheyashva galmuda bebeisa. She sat lonely in the home. V'ani b'mein rasha kol yimei hashishin. I was in the Beis Medrash all 6 days. He did not come home except for Shabbos. And he says the zechus of his wife is that she was like kamat and almana during the 6 days of the week. He did not come home for Shabbos. Okay. Now, then he says something interesting. He says, I became very famous and well known, but who was it? Ulchvayt Abba Mari Higdalu Shmi Lafari. In honor of my father, my name spread in glory. So he sort of attributes it to his father's zechus. Yeah.
What about his father-in-law that supported him so he could sit in the base medrash 6 days a
Yeah,
week?
I'm sure he appreciated that. Okay.
So far we haven't heard.
Now, let me tell you something interesting. In the times of Noda Yehuda, they started to recalculate the size of a beah. And there are different ways of measuring the beah: water displacement, the size of fingers. And lo and behold, the Noda Yehuda measured. And the Noda Yehuda writes in the Tzlach that I don't understand. The beah must have shrunk. The egg shrunk. Because based on the size, based on measuring with fingers, it seems like our beah is half the size of what it once was. And this was a tremendous discovery of the Noda Yehuda, that whatever Chazal say the Shiur is a beah, for example, matzah or maror, you have to double the Shiur. That was the chiddush of the Noda Yehuda. It's an amazing thing. Can you imagine for hundreds and hundreds of years, there's a certain Shiur in halacha, whether it's achila for any area of halacha, the Noda Yehuda said it changed. So he had many Talmidim Muvhakim. Probably the most prominent was Rebbe Lezer Flackles, the Shas Tshuvas Tshuva Me'ahava. Also a Talmud of his was the Chaye Adam, was a student of his. And the Shas Tshuva Me'ahava, with all due respect, he says, let me explain to you why the Noda Yehuda felt that the beah shrunk. Because he measured it based on fingers. And name, right? The Noda Yehuda was a giant of a man. Okay, that's why I'm bringing it in. He was very, very tall. He was the tallest man in the generation. He was 7 feet tall. Wow. Now, he was now, I don't know if that's 7 feet. It could be, people back then were much shorter, So maybe he was 6 feet tall. But he was a head taller than anybody else. And says the Tshuva Me'ava, now, you might say, well, once the Noda Yehuda says that a beah shrunk, so now you could be mekel on Yom Kippur, that someone who's allowed to eat, you could eat much more than it used to be. Now you could double, so it comes out of kula. So he said, no, chalila, to use the Noda Yehuda lekula, he only meant it lechumra. Kimar v'Rabbi hagoyin.
How could he differentiate? A beah is a beah.
Nishma, no, lechumra, you have to be choishesh that it shrunk. And then he says like this: Loi ba lahakal al shel Torah ela lahachmer l'anias daiti nira mar v'Rabbi hagoyin nishmas eden chashav l'fi hagoydel shaloi. He calculated based on his thumb. V'hu haya aruch b'dar mishacham ala gvayim al kol gvayim. He was a head taller than even the tallest guy in the generation. His thumb was twice the size of anybody else's. The egg didn't shrink. The thumb doubled. The thumb doubled. As is known, anybody who knew the Noda Yehuda and knew his thumb. In fact, says the Shas Tshuvas Me'ahava, I told the Rabbi, I said, Rabbi, how could you say that the beah shrunk? Look at your thumb. He shook his head, the sachak, and he laughed. So the Shas Tshuvas Me'ahava took that as a sign that Noda Yehuda was maskim to him, that this is just the chumrah, but me'ikar hadin, the beah did not shrink. However, I'm bringing this in just to get a picture of what the Noda Yehuda looked like. I mean, here
are there any pictures of him?
They didn't have cameras back then, But I have a painting of him. I'll show you. You'll see later. Anyway, comes the Chazon Ish, and the Chazon Ish says that which the Shas Tshuvas Me'ahava says that the Noda Yehuda was not an average size, and that he even told him, and he laughed. Eino ela petume mila ve'enoi roi lavilim beis medrash. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's a bunch of gibberish. This is why would anybody even bring this type of talk into the beis medrash? You don't think the Noda Yehuda knew to measure the beah based on the average thumb? You don't think he knew his height, and you don't think he knew you have to take an average thumb? The al karchach, it must be. The afagav dehaya bal koima. It must be, even though he was very tall, he had an average sized thumb. Or I would have said, even if his thumb was double, I'm not going to argue on the Tshuva Me'ahava, even if his thumb was double, he didn't use his thumb to measure the beah. The Shuma Abba didn't say he was there when Noda Yehuda measured. Shilo haya b'shas medida haya meir al ze'oz. Rak re'ei b'tzlach. Look in the Noda Yehuda. Umina yada d'lei mada rabba gadol shozulasei. Maybe he taka measured someone else's thumb. And because it says the Chazon Ish, if the question of the Shuma Abba was taka such a good question, and the Noda Yehuda was chayzer, then why would he establish for all of Klal Yisrael this new innovation and this new chidush about he needed to be mefarsem that he officially retracts? What's he going to do? How did he retract? Because he gave a little shmeichel when the Shuma Abba said, "You're such a tall guy." And that little shmeichel was a retraction. If the Noda Yehuda really retracted, then he would have let people know. The fact that he smiled, he thought it was humorous that the Shuma Abba was asking this question on him. But in no way is this retraction. The reason why the Noda Yehuda laughed is because he thought it was absurd. That's why he laughed. By the way, the Chasam Sofer agrees.
Chazon Ish is saying that the Noda Yehuda was really serious about the change.
Yeah, he never retracted.
But the basic question is, you measure the Be'ah
No,
by the average thumb, not by the...
Yeah, and he did. He must have, either he had an average thumb, or he did measure it by the average thumb. Okay.
Typically, you take another 50 thumbs and you see what they
Yeah,
like.
and by the way, the Chasam Sofer also agrees to the Noda Yehuda that the eggs shrunk. How do we paskin? Comes the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah says, by the Iraisas, you need to be choishish for the Noda Yehuda. Wow. That's why by the Iraisas, we double the share by matzah. We do. The share that they give you is taken into account the Noda Yehuda. That's why there's a bigger share for matzah than for kairech.
And on Yom Kippur, the shear of eating is...
No, it's only l'chumra, not l'kula. Okay, by the way, so just to point out, his son writes about him. Noda Yehuda's son writes about him that he was also a very handsome man. Anyone who recognized him saw he was Zera Berach Hashem, Cheloi La'iraisa, his strength for Torah, V'shufra L'nas Elikim. He had beauty as befitting a leader of the Jewish people, and he also brings this idea, Mishichmai Umala Gavaya Mikal Am. Okay. Now let me tell you a chidush that the Noda Yehuda said when he was a young boy, when he was 12 years old. When he was 12 years old, you see there were two brothers, and they had a big machlokes. They had a business together, and it was building up, and it was flourishing, and they became very wealthy. And the two brothers got along, and the families were very friendly to each other, and it was a wonderful relationship until they started getting on each other's nerves. I know you never heard of such a thing, but it's sometimes brothers, right? They could squabble sometimes. And it escalated until one brother said, "That's it! I never want to see you again." And he swore, "I'm never going to look at you again." And the other brother was so upset about that he began to not feel well, and he became ill, and he died. So the brother who swore not to speak to him again, he's in the Shiva house, and he feels terrible. He says, "I know I killed him." So they said, "So go ask Mechila." "I can't! I swore I'm never going to look at him again." And he didn't know if it's mutter or not. And this was a question that, took over the city. So Noda Yehuda heard the Shaila when he's a young boy at 12 years old. And Noda Yehuda says, "I don't understand. It's the pasuk in Chumash." What's the pasuk? It says by Mitzrayim that Moshe Rabbeinu told Bnei Yisrael, "Lo yisosifu l'roisam oirad oilam." You're never going to look at them again. And then it says by the Yamsuf, "Vayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim." They saw them, but Moshe told them, "You're not to look at them." The answer is, but he's dead. Must be once a person dies, it doesn't apply anymore. That's not them anymore. It's a new look. It's a new look. So you see, Riyas Adam la'achar Misa is not considered Riyah, and the Shvu is not Chal on that.
Well, what does Riyas Adam Achar Misa mean? By the kever?
So I don't understand the whole question, because once a person is 6 feet under, you're not looking at them anyways. I don't really get the whole thing. Unless he meant I'm not going to talk to him. And he has to ask Mechila. So maybe he's extrapolating, just like looking at a dead person is not looking, talking to a dead person is not talking. Okay, Rabbi, let's point out a few other interesting things. If you look over here, there's a shaila from the great Gadol of Ashtravtsa, and if you look at the date of the shaila, this was addressed to the Noda B'Yehuda, Chav Daled Sivan, Tuf Kuf. What year is that?
178 years ago.
1740, exactly. 1740. 500 plus 1240, 1740. Now, what year was Noda B'Yehuda born? 1714. So how old is he?
26.
At already 26 years old, he's receiving letters from the Gedolei Hadar about the most complex halachic issues. This was a Shailan Iguna, and he received a letter from the Goyin of Oishtrovtsa, so it's an incredible thing. Now, the Noda B'Yehuda is well known, as we saw his reaction to the Kameas of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. He was not a proponent of studying Kabbalah publicly. And this is something he writes explicitly in many places. For example, Shas Teshuvos Noda B'Yehuda Tinyana Archaim Siman Kuf Tes, he says, V'ha'emes sha'ani ein li esek b'nestaros. The truth is, I have no business with hidden matters. V'halavai she'uchal lotzes yidei chayvasi b'talmud u'poskim. Halavai, I should fulfill my obligations in learning Shas and Poskim, Hanachutzim Lamaisa, which are needed practically. V'heim chayenu, Shas and Poskim are our life, u'bahem nega, and that's what we're involved in. So already in the 300 years ago, Noda B'Yehuda is articulating the idea that the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter of Torah, is Shas and Poskim. Halavai, we should learn enough of that. And he writes again in Noda B'Yehuda Tinyana Archaim Sin Reish Aleph. He said 3 lines from the end. Aval ani ba'ani she ani sameach b'chalki chelek hanigla. I, in my poverty, I rejoice in my share, which is the share of the revealed part of the Torah, Shas and Poskim. Ve'en li esek b'nestaros. I have no business in hidden matters. V'halavai shechelek hanigla yalabi alei. Halavai, I should know what the Gemara is talking about. Hashem should show me wonders from His Torah and lead me on the right path. However, even though he writes openly not to learn Kabbalah, there's no question that Yehuda privately had a very strong knowledge of Kabbalah. In fact, he had a chavrusa in the hidden realms of Torah. Who is that? Rav Chaim Sanzer, the Divrei Chaim, was his chavrusa in Kabbalah. And in fact, in the Divrei Yedidos, in the Hakdama, the Noda B'Yehuda, he says over here, that our father, who was emanated from the stock of the ancient Gedolim, he grew up with Torah and Gedula, and he was malei kreisa in Shas and Poskim, b'chal raz loy honestly, no secret was beyond him, and devash v'chal av tachas l'shaynoi, and then he says, v'esnuim chachma. He kept his hidden knowledge modest. Kasher ba'amna, like in Shuz, shamati pe'kadosh yomer. I heard one of the holy mouths say, Kadosh Hashem, the Holy One of God, mechubad goin b'chasan ha'mefursim mekubal leki, Reb Chaim Sanzer. The Reb Chaim Sanzer said, Asher yadanu ki yu hayoloi lechaver tov b'limudei Hashem nestaros. He was a good friend of the Noda B'Yehuda in the secrets of the Torah. Hu haya omer, he would say, ki kol kisvei kodesh ari, that all the holy writings of the Arizal, v'yeser sifrei Kabbalah mekubalim b'medina zu, and the rest of the Kabbalistic texts of this Medina, even Mar Nevuchim, they were Timunim b'seisik knaf of Sela. He had a special closet, and he was well versed in all of these disciplines. In fact, in the official biography of the Noda B'Yehuda, it's quoted that the Divrei Chaim said about the Noda B'Yehuda that Safa Yechezkel b'masa merkava. It's a play on words. You know, Yechezkel Hanavi was the one who prophesied about the holy chariots. So Rabbi Yechezkel Landau had visions about the Ma'aser Merkava, meaning he knew it well. And even, by the way, if you look in the writings of the Tzlach, at times, it sort of seeps out his knowledge of the Kabbalah. For example, in the Noda B'Yehuda on Brachos, so in the beginning of Ein Oimdim, it says, Ein Oimdim lehispalel, Ela mitoch koived roish, Chasidim harishayim hayushayin sha'achas u'mispalen, Kedei sheyechavnu libam, in order to mechav in their hearts. So Rabbi Yehuda in the Tzlach HaBrachos, Lamed Amud Beis, says, V'gavoya me'al gavoya yesh loymar. You could say in a very high way, Ki libam hu roimez l'lamed beis nesivos hachachma. The word libam is a remez to the 32 pathways of chachma that are mentioned in the beginning of Sefer Yetzirah. So clearly Rabbi Yehuda had a strong yediyah in this wisdom as well. But what he would like to do is, for instance, we're going to bring a situation where he quotes the teaching of the Ari, and he tries to show that the teaching of the Ari has a source in the Shas. And then he says, once it has a source in the Shas, so now it's legitimately based. In other words, you see his attitude that the strength of the Kabbalah is only if it's miyusad on Shas. Otherwise, it doesn't carry the same weight as Shas and Poskim. So, for example, in the Drushay Haslach, in Drush Yotes Ois Beis, we know there's a famous statement of the Arizal, and the Mishnah Berurah quotes it, that during the Aser Simei Tshuva, you could rectify on each day of the Aser Simei Tshuva for that corresponding day of the year. For example, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's 7 days. For the Sunday of Aser Simei Tshuva, you could correct all the Sundays of the year. On Monday Aser Simei Tshuva, you could correct all the Mondays of the year. So he brings over here that the Tzlach says, V'hinei kama ma'al yadavar zel tshuva. How much this helps for tshuva. How's that? He says, Masoik midvash roide migvias ha'ari. Sweeter than honey from the Ari Vani, meaning the Arizal says that each day of Aser Simei Tshuva, you could rectify an entire year's worth of that day. So he says like this. Here's a proof to the Ari. Vani matzasi gam b'Gemara kiyasuz Masechta Chagiyah. Rav Idi breder Rav Yaakov Bar Idi habarogel da azol tlasa yarche ba'orcha. Rav Idi, the son of Rav Yaakov Bar Idi, would spend 3 months on the road. V'hava Yosef chad yoyma ba'oshpiza. He would spend 1 day by his host, v'chad yom ve'irav, and 1 day in the yeshiva. V'hadarasi, then he would come back, meaning he would travel 3 months to spend 1 day in the yeshiva. They would call him the student of the Rebbe for 1 day. Nafrik Rabbi Yochanan, the Beit Midrash v'Darash, Rabbi Yochanan went out to the Beis Medrash and he darshaned V'oisi Yom Yom Yidrashu the Das Dorochai Ichafedzon. And me, each day you will seek him out and you will try to know my path. It says, do you only seek out Hashem during the day and not at night? It teaches you anyone who's involved in learning Torah, even 1 day, lishma mala olav akasov, the Torah considers it as if you were involved in learning the whole year. So what do we see from this Gemara? The Gemara says, again, he used to set a 3-month journey, spend only 1 day in yeshiva. He was called a student of rabbinical camp for 1 day. He felt dejected, and he applied to himself the pasuk, I will be as one who is makri for a son. Rabbi Yochanan said, no, I beg you, don't be upset. He said, he darshan someone who learns Torah for 1 day, it's like he learned the whole year. And even in punishment, it says, according to the number of days that the spy spied out the land, Yom Lashana, they had to be punished a year for each day. It comes to teach anyone who violates an avera even 1 time a year, mala olav akasov, is considered kilu avar kol hashana kula, as if he violated the avera the whole year. Harei mefurash beGemara, we see in the Gemara, sheyoim echad yuchal l'sakein kol hashana, that in 1 day you could rectify the whole year. V'im kain, it's the Gemara. Yafa kasav ha'ari shichol sayim yom hakdesh malamasa kol yom esashar. Now the Ari is saying, very good.
Basis in the Gemara.
Yeah, even though the Ari is saying it much more, because Ari doesn't say that any day of the year you can rectify, and the Gemara is saying any day of the year you can rectify the whole year. But, it sounds, from the Najmi, you see the strength of an idea is only to what extent do we find it based in Shas.
By the way, the Rav that was traveling 30 days to learn, 3 months to learn the yeshiva, we have to assume he was learning while he was traveling. It's not like he wasn't learning.
Yeah, Torah anytime, on the... Right, but I guess it's not the same. Now, he was born when? 1714. He was first a Rav in Yampali, and then over here we have the official document that was presented to the Noid Yehuda when he was offered to be the Rav in Prague. He was offered in Kislev, on the 20th day of Kislev, in the year Ad Kiyav Shivla Yikahas Amim. What's the year? Yeah, it's called Ksav Rabbanos, where they would write on parchment. They would have a sofer write on parchment, a very flowery, complimentary introduction, including the responsibilities of the job. So, back then, there was a certain prestige, and the salary that he was offered was a very handsome salary.
That's in here too?
Yeah, I didn't copy the whole thing. It's a few pages long. I just gave you a little flavor. But I wanted you to know what year he was offered the job, and that is the year Yikahas, which is, the gematria of Yikahas is 515. So add 515 to what? 1240. So that gives you 1755.
So he was 41.
He's 41. That's relatively young to be the Rav of Prague, which is the center of the Jewish world.
The Rav of Prague?
About 40 years.
Until he passed away?
Yes.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. And, being the...
Impressive. I mean, not that machlokas and...
Yeah, not to be the Rav in those days of any city for any extended amount of time was very impressive. There were very many great Gedolim they chased them out of town. Many of the Sfarim on the shelf. Now, I'll tell you, I hope I'm saying this correctly. So what year did we say he was appointed?
1741. He was 41, 1755.
1755. Who was the Rav of Prague before him? Rav David Oppenheim. Rav David Oppenheim, when he on his deathbed, he made a certain statement that the next Rav of Prague should be mayor. And then he died. Once Rav David Oppenheim passed away, they did not find a Rav to take his place for many, many years. This position remained vacant for many years until they appointed the Noid Yehuda in 1755. His name wasn't mayor, and the Noid Yehuda had a chap how to. But anyway, that's probably not the real reason why they didn't appoint a chief rabbi. Probably the real reason is, I think the war of succession took place, and there was a lot of turmoil in Prague, and they didn't have the wherewithal to appoint a new Rav. So I want to check Rav David Oppenheim, who was the. Now I'll point out one thing. Rav David Oppenheim was nifter in Tuf Tzadi Zayin. So what year is it? 1737.
That's 18 years. They didn't have a Rav.
1737. I think it might have been 1736. Could be, right? 1736. So since his patira until now they didn't appoint a Rav. Now I believe in 1751 they offered someone the job. Who they offer? Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam. Who's he? Rabbi Yaakov Emden's brother-in-law. But as soon as they found out that he was against Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, they retracted the offer. Why did they like Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz? Why did they like Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz? Because Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz was the Rosh Hashiva in Prague in the times of Rabbi David Oppenheim. He was an old Prague boy. So they had very warm feelings. Which is, for the Noid Yehuda, in order for him to get the job in Prague and keep the job, he had to have been somewhat respectful to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, which is part of what drew the ire of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. He said, why are you being so nice to him? Because it's comfortable for your position? In other words, in Prague they leaned favorably toward Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Okay, be it as it may, this is the Ksav Rabbanos that was
But
offered.
he didn't live in Prague before he became the Rav, right? He was a Rav in that other town.
Yampoli, yeah, right.
Yeah, so the fact they couldn't find anybody for 19 years.
They-
couldn't find anybody
yeah.
in Prague that was worthy of the.
You know what?
Wow.
What goes around comes around.
Most out of Torah.
Do you know how many big shuls and institutions there are in the last 25 years? No, that the position laid empty until they found, until they found the right person. Okay, we'll end with one thing, and then we'll continue this tomorrow, because this is just in preparation of the real Yahrzeit, which is tomorrow. Okay. Taf Kuf Yud Zayin. What year is that? 1757. There was a war in Prague, and the Noid Yehuda.
After he became Rav.
Yeah, the Noid Yehuda was very well connected politically, and he had the opportunity to leave the city and sort of to secure his safety, but he felt that would not be correct. Even though many people fled, he did not do so, but he felt as the Rav of the city, he can't be a captain who abandons ship. And he helped the impoverished in the city, the Aniyim, and the unfortunate and downtrodden in the city. And he even helped and encouraged the Jews to help the soldiers in the battle. And it sounds like he himself was encouraging fortifying the walls of the cities. And in all of his endeavors, he was always a very loyal citizen. And tomorrow we'll see he even composed a special tefillah in honor of the Empress, Maria Theresa, which we still have. He composed a special Misha Berach for Empress Maria Theresa, which we have here on the Shiur number 18. So Yehi Zichrei Baruch, and he should be Me'os Yosher for all of Klal Yisrael. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.